that he'd extracted everything he could from the relationship and was prepared to move on to their next target. Claire realized that she couldn't wait any longer to expose Derek's crimes. The evidence she gathered was more than sufficient to ensure his conviction, and delaying any further would risk allowing him to steal millions of dollars from her family's business. The time had come for Derek to learn that he'd chosen the wrong family to target, and that his victims were far more powerful and resourceful than he'd ever imagined. The confrontation that Claire planned would not only expose Derek's crimes, but also reveal her own true identity, finally showing him that he'd been trying to con one of the wealthiest families in Nigeria. Derek's shock at learning that his supposedly poor wife was actually a billionaire heiress would be nothing compared to his horror at realizing that his entire criminal network was about to be dismantled by the very people he'd tried to defraud. Claire's transformation from victim to avenger was about to begin, and Derek Adekunle was about to discover that some people fight back when they're betrayed, and that the consequences of his crimes would be far more severe than he'd ever imagined possible. The night Claire decided to confront Derek, she arranged for Duke to be out of the house visiting relatives, claiming she wanted privacy for an important conversation with her husband. What Derek didn't know was that law enforcement officers were positioned around their neighborhood, ready to move in as soon as Claire gave them the signal that she'd gathered the final evidence they needed for his arrest. Claire prepared for the confrontation by setting up recording equipment throughout their living room and ensuring that every word of their conversation would be captured for use in Derek's eventual trial. She'd also prepared copies of all the evidence she'd gathered about his criminal activities, his fake identity, and his affair with Funmi. Tonight would be the last time Derek would be able to lie to her, because Claire finally had the power to expose every aspect of his deception. Derek came home that evening in an unusually good mood, talking excitedly about a business opportunity that he claimed would soon improve their financial situation dramatically. He was describing his fake cryptocurrency investment scheme with enthusiasm, not realizing that Claire already knew exactly what he was planning and how he intended to use her family's money to fund his criminal activities. Claire listened to Derek's lies with a calm expression that she'd been practicing for weeks, nodding at appropriate moments and asking questions that encouraged him to reveal more details about his plans. She wanted Derek to incriminate himself as thoroughly as possible before she revealed that she knew everything about his true identity and criminal background. When Derek finished describing his investment opportunity, Claire surprised him by saying that she was very interested in getting involved and that she thought her father might want to invest a large amount of money in the scheme. Derek's eyes lit up with greed as he realized that Claire was offering him access to exactly the kind of wealth he'd been planning to steal through more complicated methods. Derek immediately began pushing Claire to arrange a meeting between him and Chief Lawson, claiming that time was critical for the investment opportunity and that they needed to act quickly to secure their position. His eagerness to involve Claire's father in his criminal scheme provided Claire with even more evidence of his fraudulent intentions, as Derek clearly believed he was about to gain direct access to the Lawson family fortune. But Claire had one more surprise for Derek before she revealed the truth about what she discovered. She told Derek that she'd been thinking about their marriage and their future together, and that she decided she was ready to start trying for children more seriously. She suggested that they should stop using birth control immediately and focus on building the family they'd always talked about. Derek's reaction to Claire's suggestion about having children was the final proof Claire needed of his deception and lack of genuine commitment to their marriage. Instead of showing excitement or enthusiasm about starting a family with the woman he claimed to love, Derek became uncomfortable and evasive, making excuses about wanting to wait until their financial situation was more stable. Claire pressed Derek about his reluctance to have children, pointing out that he'd always claimed to want a family, and that their current income was sufficient to support a child. Derek's increasingly desperate attempts to avoid committing to pregnancy revealed his true feelings about their marriage and his plans for their future together. Finally, Claire decided it was time to stop pretending. She looked directly at Derek and told him that she knew he'd been using contraceptives without her knowledge, that she'd found the hidden supplies in his dresser, and that she understood he'd been preventing pregnancy while allowing her to believe they were trying to conceive together. Derek's immediate response was to deny Claire's accusations and try to turn the conversation back to her supposed violation of his privacy. But Claire cut him off by producing copies of all the evidence she'd gathered about his criminal activities, his fake identity, and his affair with Funmi. She spread the documents and photographs across their coffee table, watching Derek's face change from anger to confusion to pure terror as he realized the extent of what Claire had discovered. The first document Claire showed Derek was a copy of his real birth certificate, revealing his true name and the fact that everything he told her about his background was a lie. She followed this with photographs of Derek meeting with his criminal associates, recordings of his phone conversations about fraudulent investment schemes, and bank records showing money transfers to accounts associated with his various illegal activities. Derek's attempts to explain or justify the evidence Claire presented became increasingly frantic and incoherent as she revealed more and more proof of his deception. He tried to claim that the documents were fake, that Claire was being manipulated by people who wanted to destroy their marriage, and that he could explain everything if she would just give him a chance. But Claire wasn't finished. The next set of documents she showed Derek contained evidence of his affair with FundMe, including photographs of them together in intimate situations and recordings of their conversations about their criminal schemes. Claire played audio recordings of Derek describing her in cruel, degrading terms while laughing with FundMe about how easily he'd manipulated Claire's emotions. Hearing his own voice describing her as naive and pathetic was devastating for Claire, but it also strengthened her resolve to ensure that Derek faced serious consequences for his actions. She realized that Derek had never seen her as a human being with real feelings, but rather as an obstacle to be overcome in his quest to steal from her family. Derek's reaction to the evidence of his affair was to become angry and defensive, accusing Claire of spying on him and violating his rights. He claimed that his relationship with FundMe was purely professional, that the recordings had been taken out of context, and that Claire was being paranoid and jealous for no reason. Claire's response to Derek's denials was to reveal the final and most devastating piece of evidence she gathered, recordings of Derek and FundMe planning to steal millions of dollars from Lawson Industries within the next few days. The recordings clearly showed Derek describing how he would use his access to company systems and his relationship with Claire to transfer money to offshore accounts before disappearing permanently. The look of absolute terror on Derek's face when he heard his own voice discussing the details of his planned theft told Claire everything she needed to know about his guilt and his awareness of the serious legal consequences he was about to face. Derek finally understood that Claire had evidence that could send him to prison for decades, and that his carefully planned criminal scheme had been completely exposed. But Claire had saved the biggest shock for last. She stood up from the couch where they'd been sitting and told Derek that there was one more thing he needed to know before the police arrived to arrest him. She explained that she wasn't actually the poor intern he thought he'd married, but rather the daughter and heir of Chief Emmanuel Lawson, one of the wealthiest men in Nigeria. Derek's confusion at Claire's revelation quickly turned to horror as he realized the full implications of what she was telling him. Claire explained that she'd been working at Lawson Industries under a false identity to gain real-world experience before taking over the family business, and that Derek had unknowingly targeted one of the most powerful families in the country for his criminal activities. The realization that he'd been trying to defraud a billionaire family who had the resources to completely destroy him and his criminal network left Derek speechless with terror. He finally understood why Claire had been able to gather such comprehensive evidence against him, why law enforcement had been so cooperative in building a case against him, and why his arrest was inevitable. Claire told Derek that Chief Lawson had been aware of his criminal activities for weeks, and that they'd been allowing him to continue his schemes only to gather more evidence and identify his criminal associates. She explained that Derek's entire network would be dismantled within hours, and that everyone involved in his fraudulent activities would face serious legal consequences. Derek's attempts to negotiate or plead with Claire fell on deaf ears. Claire told him that she'd initially hoped to find some explanation for his behavior that would allow her to forgive him, but that the evidence of his crimes and the cruelty of his deception had convinced her that he deserved whatever punishment the legal system would impose on him. The sound of sirens approaching their house signaled the end of Derek's freedom and the beginning of his legal consequences. Claire had timed the confrontation perfectly, ensuring that Derek would be arrested immediately after learning the full extent of his exposure and the power of the family he tried to victimize. As police officers entered their home to arrest Derek, Claire felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She was glad that Derek would face justice for his crimes, and that his victims would see some measure of revenge for their losses. But she was also mourning the death of what she believed was genuine love, grieving for the marriage and future that had never really existed outside of Derek's elaborate deception. Derek's arrest was swift and professional, with officers reading him his rights while he continued trying to convince Claire that everything could be worked out between them. His desperate attempts to maintain his fake persona, even as he was being handcuffed, showed Claire that Derek was incapable of genuine honesty, even when facing the complete destruction of his criminal career. The last thing Derek saw as he was led away from the house was Claire standing in their doorway, no longer the naive young woman he thought he'd been manipulating, but rather a powerful heiress who had outmaneuvered him completely. His final expression was one of disbelief and regret, not for the pain he'd caused Claire, but for underestimating the intelligence and resources of the family he'd chosen to target. The weeks following Derek's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and personal healing that Claire had never anticipated when she first decided to expose her husband's crimes. The case against Derek and his criminal network became one of the biggest fraud investigations in Nigerian history, with law enforcement agencies uncovering evidence of crimes that extended far beyond what even Claire's private investigators had discovered. Funmi Adekunle was arrested at Lawson Industries the morning after Derek was taken into custody, her shock at being caught providing investigators with additional evidence about the scope of their criminal activities. The human resources records that Funmi had been accessing illegally revealed that Derek's network had been targeting dozens of wealthy families and successful businesses across Lagos and the surrounding regions. The investigation expanded to include financial crimes units from multiple countries as investigators traced Derek's offshore accounts and discovered connections to international money laundering operations. What had started as Claire's personal quest for justice had uncovered a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating successfully for years before Derek made the mistake of targeting the wrong family. Chief Lawson's decision to allow the full extent of Claire's story to become public served multiple purposes. On one level, it warned other wealthy families about the specific tactics that Derek's network had used to identify and manipulate their targets. But more importantly for Claire, it established her publicly as a strong, intelligent woman who had successfully fought back against deception and betrayal. The media coverage of Claire's story was overwhelmingly positive, with journalists and commentators praising her courage in exposing Derek's crimes and her intelligence in gathering the evidence needed to ensure his conviction. Instead of being portrayed as a naive victim who had been fooled by a skilled con artist, Claire was presented as a resourceful heiress who had outmaneuvered criminals who thought they could exploit her family's wealth. Claire's transformation from anonymous intern to public figure happened almost overnight, as her real identity became known throughout Lagos business circles and beyond. The revelation that the quiet young woman, who had been working at various entry-level positions within Lawson Industries, was actually the heir to one of Nigeria's largest business empires shocked her former colleagues and created a new level of respect for her commitment to understanding the family business from the ground up. But the personal cost of exposing Derek's deception was significant for Claire, who struggled with feelings of betrayal, humiliation, and loss that couldn't be solved by legal victories or public recognition. The realization that her entire marriage had been a performance designed to steal from her family left Claire questioning her judgment about people and relationships in ways that would take years to fully resolve. Dupe became Claire's primary source of emotional support during the difficult period following Derek's arrest, helping her process the complex feelings that came with learning that someone she'd loved had never genuinely cared about her. Dupe's combination of practical wisdom and unconditional loyalty provided Claire with the stability she needed to begin rebuilding her sense of self-worth and her faith in her ability to recognize genuine relationships. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive, with Derek's criminal conviction making it impossible for him to contest Claire's petition or claim any portion of her assets. Claire's lawyers ensured that Derek would receive nothing from their marriage except the legal consequences of his crimes, while also securing court orders that would prevent him from ever contacting Claire or her family again. Chief Lawson's response to his daughter's ordeal was to accelerate her transition into leadership roles within the family business, recognizing that Claire's experience with Derek had given her valuable insights into human nature and corporate security that would serve her well as a business leader. Instead of sheltering Claire from responsibility,